And the next one is?
Courage and innovative professional help.
Very good. And we're going to go through each step in a moment. And the last E is?
Encourage self-help and other support strategies.
Fantastic. So we're going to talk about the A first and the assessing part. And this one is probably the most uncomfortable for people, right? Because we're saying that we need to assess people for risk of suicide or harm. And that's important because unfortunately with mental illness, the risk of suicide or harm is real. And unfortunately, something that happens. And so we're going to talk about suicidal thoughts and behaviors now. And we're also going to talk about non-suicidal self-injury, something that unless you're in the healthcare profession, we're not common and used to seeing, right? But they are very, very real and unfortunately, again, prevalent, not only in adults, but in our youth and young adults, in fact. And so it's important that we have this tough conversation. I forgot, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I do want to say to you that at any point Emily and I gets to topics that make you really uncomfortable, if it creates any distress for you, by all means you can opt out, you can just step outside. You know, we have people out there that can help support you. And also, even with some of the activities, sometimes, you know, people are uncomfortable, and that's okay. So I want you to know you have the option of opting out if you need to. Yes, sir.
Is there a time and space, let's say someone expresses opinion or something, and there's a word that's being triggered, it's going to be wrote down on the parking lot, and we can have like a minute to unpack that word?
Oh, absolutely. So this space is for you. Absolutely.
Write it on the parking lot, and then we can unpack it a little bit and talk about it.
Absolutely. So whatever you guys, we're here to make this class relevant for you. So what James asked is if there's something that's said that may be a trigger word for someone in the group, if we can just stop, you can share that, and we'll try to, you know, walk through it and unpack it for you if we need to. Okay. So again, this is your space. We're here to support you in this, and so thank you for that. So I think I'm going to go ahead and share one story now as it relates to suicide and harm. So I have a girlfriend, my very best friend for almost probably 40 years now, or close to it. She struggles with panic attacks, and we're going to talk about that a little later. And so she had gotten to a point a year and a half or so ago where she had the agoraphobia. She couldn't step outside the house anymore, but we didn't recognize it in the moment. But long story short, it was over an Easter weekend, and I was entertaining. I had family and friends coming over, people from out of town and everything, and she's so close, you know, she knows everybody. So she says, Mavis, okay, let me come over with you now instead of waiting till the weekend. And so she left for work that Wednesday, maybe, I think it was the Wednesday. She was in a really bad state. She had the panic attack. Someone took her home. Thursday, she tried to go to work. She went to walk the dog. She couldn't. As soon as she went outside, she said something came over me. I had to run right back in. Anyway, long story short, so now she's down. It's Thursday evening. She says, so come get me tomorrow, Mavis. I'll stay instead of waiting until Saturday. So we get her, and, you know, we do busyness of preparing for guests and company. Anyway, so by the Sunday, she was to a point where she couldn't stay in a room by herself anymore. So I left her, let's say I left the room that she was sleeping in to go to my room because it was the end of the night. And she came up immediately behind me. And then, so I went to get her some water, and then she went to the other room that my other friend was staying in. So that's the point of distress she was in. So I realized we had to take her to the hospital at that point. And she agreed. She actually wanted to go because she said, Mavis, I've never felt like this before. I don't know what's happening, but yeah, I agree, we need to go. And the first question they ask you when you take someone to the hospital for a mental health crisis is, have you thought about suicide? And she said yes. And I was devastated, of course, as her best friend. And the first thing she did was she said yes, not others, but me. And she turned right to me immediately, Mavis, I know I never told you, I never told anybody, but she said, I have been thinking about it. And of course, you know, I remained composed because I was there for her, right? And but I was shaken by her saying that, because in my head, and I guess all of us felt like, well, it's, you know, we know it's panic attacks and this happens. A lot of people have them. A lot of people have them, but we don't realize the extent to how distressed people are sometimes. And so we suffer in silence. And that's part of why we're having this course, so that we can help move past that point. And so this is a tough topic to talk about. Thankfully, she was, you know, she was fine. She stayed in the hospital for the time she needed to. She came back to stay with me afterwards. But it took me a while to even ask her. And when I say a while, it took me months before I asked her the question again. And I'm somebody who's trained, who knows better, right? But that's how uncomfortable this topic makes us. And of course, she was going to her psychiatrist, her therapist, doing everything she could to maintain her health. But I'm saying that to you to say that, you know, this can be a very emotional topic as well. You know, every time we're in the class, we have someone or know somebody who has either attempted or completed suicide in the family, or friends or loved one. And so this is a sensitive topic for us, but I recognize that, and we still have to get through it, because this is part of what will help us be able to help others and even ourselves. So you may be someone who's thought about it and never spoken about it. And so, so I'm saying that to say we're here to support each other. So a risk assessment, yes.
So what happens when someone is like your friend, she was suicidal, but the good news is you were able to intervene for her? What happens when you literally try to intervene and the person is set on it and actually completes it?
Thank you for that.
And you're left with trying to figure out how could you help that person?
Excellent question. And so we're going to walk you through several steps now to be able to hopefully intervene. But I also have to say to you that we're not always going to be successful sometimes, and that is a tragedy. It's a tragedy that happens, and so we'll talk about that in this segment also. And I want to say to you that most of you are probably not clinicians in the group, right? I know that a couple are. But even clinicians sometimes, and even psychiatrists and trained people, are not able to help everyone. And so that is a sad reality. Even pastors, right? So a lot of pastors get people who come to them, and thankfully, how many of you go to FCBC by any chance? Right, most of you. And so I'm grateful. I don't attend FCBC. I'm not a member there, I should say, but I do attend occasionally. I don't serve another church. But I'm so happy that Pastor Mike uses the pulpit to talk about something that's important in his own personal struggle, because until we're having these conversations, right, having the conversations makes it easier for people to ask for help and to know that they're not alone. And so even with all of that, though, sometimes people are not, you know, we're not able to save everyone. And again, even clinicians aren't able to. So I want you to understand that, and the importance of having help for ourselves as individuals also. And so we'll talk about that. I have a therapist also that I see, and I do because my daughter has anxiety. I have that best friend who I told you about, and I have another very close friend, and my ex had struggled with mental illness. And so I needed support for myself to be able to stay well enough to support them also and make sure that I'm healthy too. So I want to say that to all of you. It's important that you also get help for yourself and for your family, okay? So we'll talk more about that as we go on. Tell me what you think are some risk factors, or high, risk factors, as I would say, for people maybe having suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide. Yes.
Bullying.
Oh, very good. Absolutely, bullying. And now, unfortunately, it's even cyberbullying, right? We have to worry about technology today. What else do you think of? What else do you think of risk factors for suicide? I'm sorry, what was that?
Assault.
Oh,
Being raped.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So having suffered through some type of assault. Excellent. And I want to call that trauma. And we'll talk about trauma later as well. Yes, ma'am.
Cutting?
So cutting is a self-injury, and we're going to get to self-injury before we wrap up this section. Yes, ma'am.
Loneliness.
Loneliness is a sign sometimes that happens, right, when people have anxiety and depression, but absolutely can be a risk factor for suicide. Yes, sir.
Giving off a behavior that could be perpetuated, and creating mindsets for other people to take on those thoughts of not wanting to be around as well. I don't know what you would call it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So being around individuals perhaps who have what I want to say, and also strange behaviors sometimes, and negative behaviors, and so some of that, I think some of what you're referencing, I would equate with perhaps people who have thoughts around psychosis, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Two things: bad relationship breakups and loss of loved ones.
So it's definitely sudden loss, absolutely. And I'm going to take one more. I saw it here, and then we're
The
going to talk about
anniversary of a major event, even if it's positive, very fact that people, or like I said, a celebration.
Yes.
Coming up.
So absolutely, all of those can be triggers for individuals. So we're going to talk about some more warning signs, and I want to go through some risk assessment factors too. So we have gender up here. Why do you think gender is here as a risk assessment or factor? Yes.
Gender can also predicate on the identity of identity issues. Let's say, for example, there is societal standards of womanhood and manhood that can lead to feminine toxic fragility or masculine fragility or masculine toxic. So something that you're trying to fit yourself into something that doesn't really, what you really don't identify as.
Absolutely. So cultural pressures around gender identity and sexual identity. Absolutely. So, so I'm asking about groups that you think may be at higher risk, and so for gender, that's